Welcome, everybody. This week is a deep dive for my early childhood educators. Whether you're an early childhood educator or working with any age group, I think you'll still find this a really helpful podcast. A couple of weeks ago, I sent out an email to my early childhood educators asking, how do you want to learn? How can I help you? Because I'm getting more and more children diagnosed earlier. I'm getting more and more early childhood centres saying, we've got children who are undiagnosed. What can we do to support them? So I thought, I really need to do some more around early childhood. And when I looked, I realised I hadn't done early childhood for quite some time. So I apologise. I hope you found some other tips along the way. Drum roll, on Monday, September 15th, I'm doing my early childhood live virtual course, which means you can join me from anywhere on Zoom. If you can't make that day, don't worry. You can do the online on-demand course wherever it suits you and any time that works for you. Get out your diary, see if you're available. Now, I surveyed my community and people said Mondays were the best day. Must say, I was a little bit surprised, but Monday I'm going with what people told me. So we're going with a Monday, 9 till 3. I'm going to send you out a goodie bag with lollies and sensory tools. So make sure you register ASAP. And if you register this week, when the podcast comes out, $50 off. I've never done $50 off a live virtual. It's just a one special for early years. It'll only be for this week. So make sure you check your emails to get the $50 off. Now, if you're like, Sue, but I'm not available on Monday the 13th, do not worry. I've got your back. I'm also going to do $50 off the online on demand so you can learn anywhere, anytime. The advantage of the online on demand, you get a full transcript of the course. The live virtual, you'll get a replay of the course, but I don't do a transcript. But yeah, look, you can choose which way you want to learn. Online on demand, because people said that's what they preferred to learn when it suited them, or live virtual, $50 off this week only. Check your emails. Very excited. Never done that sort of price before. And wherever you are in the world, you can get the $50 off. So check your emails, check my website, and I hope to see you at the live virtual or online on demand. And you can always send me questions along the way. So once you're one of my students, you just will learn how to send me an email directly. So this week's podcast is a deep dive into an ebook. So I highly recommend you print out the ebook. It comes from me asking early childhood educators what are their top 2 questions they want me to answer. I then went through all of those and collated it into tip sheets, 100 tips for you for the early years with lots of practical strategies. But remember, I want you to actually look at like how to support children with communication. I want you to go, done it, tried it. Oh, that one wore out. Actually, we should maybe go back to that one. Like, I want you to go through it, not like you don't have to do every one of the tips. They're more like tried it, didn't work, worth re-looking at, okay? That's how I look at all my tip sheets. Because remember, strategies wear out and not every strategy works for everybody. So you've always just got to look at my tips like that. This is going to give you lots of tips, but I also hope some reassurance. The early years is complex. I was doing a workshop this week for an early childhood service on Zoom, which I loved, and what dedicated staff. It was a 6 till 9 o'clock after a long daycare. So very impressive of them to be so committed. And they had a number of children who are undiagnosed who probably will end up with a diagnosis. But they also had children where they're like, well, lots of children do this. It's behavior, or, for example, they had a child biting, and a lot of the people in the baby room were saying, well, babies often bite, but this child's 2. And so this is what makes it hard. Is it something a phase, or is it something to be worried about? And I agree that's a really hard question, and where we need to look at more than just the biting. That's not really an indicator of a diagnosis. There's a whole lot of things we look at. I hope that you get some top tips listening to this today or from the ebook. Download the ebook. You can always airdrop it and share it with your friends and colleagues, because remember, the more that we share, the more that we help and make a difference to the children. So I hope you find some top tips from today. Hope you can join me Zoom soon. So this podcast, I'm going to do a bit of a dive into what's in the early childhood ebook. Now, there's over 100 tips and strategies, so I'm not going to cover all of them, but I just thought I've looked at your questions. So, for example, Haley and Carolyn and Kerry and Katie and Nadia all wanted to know about diagnosis, like what are the red flags? So, in the ebook on page 1, 2, and 3, there's some great strategies about understanding how hard diagnosis is, that autism spectrum affects social, communication, motor, behavior, sensory. And then I've got what signs to look for. And there's some really helpful things there. Are they showing interest? Are they bringing items to you? Are they following your gaze? Do they engage in pretend play? All of these great things that I'd encourage you to go and read the signs to look for. So if you haven't downloaded the ebook, can I recommend you do that? Or if you don't get my emails, you can actually go and sign up for the ebook on the podcast page on the episode today. So make sure you go to this episode and download the ebook. I recommend having it on your phone or your iPad. It's just such a good way to do it, and also can be invaluable to refer back to. I recommend you print out some of these things for families. You could spend hours trying to find some of this information, whereas I'm trying to put it in a condensed version for you so that you can go, oh, okay, doesn't understand simple one-stretch instructions like give the block to me, show me the dog. That's helpful to know that these are the things that we'd be looking for. So I highly recommend you have a look at that and even print that out and talk to your colleagues and have a think how you can talk to the families. And as I say, in the second tip sheet is really based on, many of you wanted to know, how do you engage this child? So Laura and Esther and Christy all ask questions around how to engage children who learn differently. And for children who learn differently or engage differently, we need to teach differently. We need to think about that child. Now, in my early childhood 5-hour course, I go through like the stages of development and the stages of play, observing where the child's at. But part of that course, I also go through different ways of teaching. And I think this was invaluable to put in the ebook, just to give you that context that in a play-based curriculum or early childhood curriculum, sometimes you're going to have to directly teach a child something. You're going to have to take them into a quiet environment and sit and maybe teach them how to point to something or how to hand you a visual. Or if you're doing a now, next, late visual, you might start off doing that when all the children are outside, just coming in and just, I know you haven't got a lot of time, spending a couple of minutes directly teaching a child something. Just like if you're teaching them how to tie their shoelaces, you do that as a one-on-one. So think, how can I actually find a moment to directly teach them a skill? The next way, I call it engineered, where you're going to set up those situations. So let's pretend we're teaching a child to point. We might have that where we do a direct teaching where we sit and we might go hand over hand and show them how to point to something they want in a very direct way. An engineered situation is where I might set up a situation. So I have their barbecue shapes or an apple, and I get them to point to that at eating time, where I actually create an opportunity where I go, okay, at eating time, I'm going to make them point to the cup to have the drink in. I'm going to get them to point to the puzzle they want. I'm going to actually set up situations where they have to point, okay? Then incidental. There'll be times that come up every day you can teach a child to point. So you can think of all the little incidental ways. And then you might actually have some activities where you set up that they have to point to things, like they might like playing with Lego, and they might have to point to the person they want or the blue block. Think about getting them to point to things. But the big one for me is you have to make learning fun. For many of my children, we have to make it engaging and fun, and you might have to be animated, or you might have to, if they love the Lego, think, how can I make Lego fun? Or Duplo, if they love Mobilo or whatever how are you going to make it fun? Then I would be looking at, well, how can I adapt strategies? And the one people forget the most is what I call backward training, which is where often the child's we expect them to do the whole puzzle. Well, how about they just do the last piece? Or we expect them to colour in the whole thing. What if they just have to colour in one bit, the last bit? So they get to experience success. A lot of my children, because they have a short attention span, We need to make the activity shorter. And one way to make it shorter is actually to just get them to do the last step. Instead of packing everything up, how about they just put the last couple of trains in? Think, how can they do the last couple of steps? Or if you want them to open their barbecue shapes, you might ease it open and they just have to do the last pull of that. The back on the shoelaces, if you're teaching a child to put their shoes on, you might actually put the whole shoe on and all they have to do is one Velcro. Or think, how can I just give them the last step? And that makes it more fun because they feel more successful. Imagine if you didn't complete anything. You would start to get stressed and anxious. So think how you can make it fun and adapt those activities. But on this page, I would love all of you to have a look on this page in the ebook where it says, the click of the camera button captures the perfect action shot. Okay? So find the perfect moment to teach. Observe the child. Get to notice the signs of the perfect moment. You know when you take a photo, 1 second before, you could have had a horrible face. 1 second after, you could have had a horrible face. You've got to find that sweet spot, that perfect photo. So when the child's calm and happy, that might be the time to teach them to point. When the child's come and sat at the table happily to have their barbecue shapes, that might be the day to help them open them, not the day they're upset, anxious, and dysregulated. So much it is about finding those perfect moments. Now, I know you're all busy, you've got a lot of kids to care for, but just try and find those perfect little moments if you can. The next page was about how and why to use visuals, and a number of people wanted to know about working with nonverbal children, and visuals are so important with children with limited communication. But the reason visuals are also important because many children have difficulty with auditory processing. Your words disappear, whereas visuals stays up. But there are lots of ways to use visuals. So you can have photos, you can have the environments of visual. There are so many different ways. But just remember, you still need to allow the child process to look at the picture, make sure the picture means something to them, and use lots of different visuals. One of my tips is be eclectic with your visuals and always add speech with the visuals. So we won't just be using visuals, we'll be actually using our words as well. Now, the other question a lot of people had about how to engage the child. And Laura, Esther, Christy, and Wendy, I know I talked about different ways of thinking, but I also think part of it is how you communicate with the child. So I've got down about being a supportive communication partner because some of our children, we use too many words. It has to be clear and concise, one step at a time. Those of you who've done my courses, I call this I'm being a GPS. I think how a GPS talks, a calm, monotone voice. It actually, though for some of my children, you might have to be dramatic, as it says in the instructions. But you shouldn't be using more words than the child, probably just 1 or 2 more words than the child. And please do not insist they look at you. Your aim is that they understand. And many people on the spectrum tell us eye contact is painful. So as long as they're looking in your general direction or processing what you're saying, some children actually to process, to stay calm, will be stimming, but actually listening. I look for a look in their eyes to know if they are listening. And part of being a good communication partner is to know what they look like. What does their face look like when they're focused? What does their face look like when they're anxious? I really think about how to understand them. Look for their body posture. Look for the cues that they're engaged and ready to listen. So I think a lot of us when we're working with young children is understanding that child, understanding how they communicate, understanding how they listen. And then we can actually engage that child by looking for that perfect camera moment and then thinking, well, how can I engage them? Is it a visual? How am I going to communicate? How am I going to use my words? But for those of you who have nonverbal children or limited speech and wanted to build language, Megan and Danielle, I have included how to create a communication-enriched environment, which is, again, all about thinking about what visuals and photos are you going to use. How can you help the child engage and communicate? One of my favourite ways is to get an old-fashioned lunchbox, and some of them you might have to be a clear lunchbox because if the child doesn't have object permanence, once it's they can't see it, it doesn't exist. And then on top, you might put a picture of their sandwich and their apple. And they need to hand you the sandwich and you put the sandwich in the lunchbox. They need to hand you the apple and you put the apple in the lunchbox. That's picture exchange communication. You might have a board where the child hands you a picture of the train set and you give them the trains. So setting up those little opportunities to create communication. And they're just quick little things you can do every day. So in the ebook, I've got how you can create a communication environment at home and at school. And there's some great ways that you can do that in the ebook and some nice visuals to show you. On the next page is really what we need to think about for many of our children, and that is making the program engaging and motivating, but by using the things they love, by extending them, by helping them do new things, but letting them know when they're going to do the things they love. So I was talking to a preschool teacher last week. They have a student that loves Mobilo. It might be trains, it might be bubbles, whatever it is. But on this page in the ebook, we've got the now, next, later. And I highly recommend you put a photo of the child, maybe write their name as well, and do the now, next, later. And you can actually, now we're doing the puzzle, next we're doing bubbles, later you can go outside. Be clear what they're going to do. Personally, I like to have the thing they like in the next, in the middle, because otherwise they'll think they're doing bubbles forever, Mobilo forever, and often they won't get off that. If you watch SBS, they often have now, next, later. So you know what show's on now, what's on next, what's on later. So I highly recommend you think, well, what is your goal? What do you want them to be able to do? And it might just be 1 minute on that activity, 1 minute doing something, a non-preferred activity. And then you can just extend it a little bit at a time. But the big thing is, and it's on this page, that never use the thing they love as punishment. Don't say they can't have it. Tell them what they need to do. Now we're going to do a puzzle. Next we'll do Mobilo. Later you can read a book. And be very clear what they're going to do. And that is where your visuals can really support you to do that. Now, lots of you had children who are having trouble self-regulating and with anxiety. Judy, Sandy, Sally all had things around this. Now, in the younger years, many children have trouble self-regulating. There are sort of stages of children learning to self-regulate. Remember, first of all, they might rely on you to self-regulate. Some of my children struggle to self-regulate. And I do recommend you have a look at that, setting up a calm corner and ways to do that. But in the ebook, I've actually got some calming activities and some alerting activities, because some children actually need more alerting sensory activities. Some of my children are tired and lethargic. Some need calming activities like slow rocking or soft music or stretching or chewing or fidgeting. And many of my children in the young years do use their stimming, which is self-stimulation, to calm. And you do need to let them have that time. One of my little boys would love to just go out in the playground and play with leaves. One of my little girls liked to sing songs to calm herself, to give herself that self-regulation. So you need to think about, how can I give them those preventative breaks? How can I give them time to self-soothe? That's really what it is. When children are dysregulated, they need time to soothe. Now, of course, I want to teach them how to self-regulate too, and emotional regulation. But that might be you putting in more preventative breaks, making sure they've been to the toilet, had a drink, had something to eat. I'm always shocked how many of my children are not eating, drinking, and going to the toilet. And remember, that would have a massive impact on your ability to self-soothe and calm. And then I've got some information in the ebook on using sensory tools to improve behaviour. So again, this is where you might have those tools in a basket in a tent for some children. But some children need big body breaks. They need to go and throw things or hang on the monkey bars. So you need to think about, well, how can I use sensory toys or tools? Do they need a weighted thing on them? Do they need something to chew? Do they need the wooden hand massager that I've got in here that many of the children love? But so often, if they are seeing an occupational therapist, that is the ideal person to ask, what does the child need? Do you need to wrap them up in something weighted? What will help this child actually self-regulate. And then the aim is that at first you might be helping them regulate, but they will seek those out and use them, or you might build in those preventative breaks. Now, the other one that lots and lots of people wanted help with, including Nico, Adele, Christy, was toilet training. So I have included my top 10 tips for toilet training that I recommend you print out and give to parents. The number one thing to remember is don't wait for signs of readiness. So many people are waiting. Oh, I'll wait. I was devastated last week on my Facebook page. I put up something on getting children out of nappies, and I had parents who had 8 and 9-year-olds still in nappies. Now, somebody needs to help these families earlier. And I find that a lot of parents are like, I was waiting. It's once they're 4, you've waited long enough. You need to get on with it. And it needs to be toilet timing, not toilet training. So by that, I mean they need to have a routine where they're taken regularly. Now, if you've got a child who's wetting their pants and you're taking them every half an hour, that's because they've been in nappies for too long. They've actually lost bladder control. The longer you leave it, the weaker those muscles get. Think of yourself. You build up those muscles. Many teachers, we have to build up those muscles. And after the holidays, often you haven't built up that bladder for a whole session. If you've ever had a baby, you'll know you need to build those muscles up. So my number one tip is avoid potties. And I had a parent last week on that Facebook go, my son's on a potty and I can't get him on the toilet. I say start with the toilet. Start with the end in mind. Make sure you use visuals and have a look at the fabulous podcast I did with a mum on twins, on toilet training twins. And she included in that podcast, we included a beautiful visual she was using with her daughter. And anyway, you can have a look. But remember, at first, you're going to have to take them really regularly. They have been weeing in a nappy for so long. And it is, I find you've just got to knuckle down. But the other tip I haven't included here, and parents, I would love you to start thinking about this. Do they actually know what a toilet is? Have they ever been in the bathroom? Do they know the procedure? You just go off there and come out. They have no idea what you're doing. So there's no such thing as oversharing when it comes to teaching toilet training. And this is often where if you've got a sibling, it's great to do it at the same time, or other children that you're doing no nappies. So the first step in the preschool or at home, start taking them with other children, getting them involved in the process, even if they're flushing, putting toilet paper in, flushing, washing their hands. Just get them involved in the process. I have toilet trained hundreds of kids, but the first step is that, letting them see what the environment's like, desensitizing them to the sensory, actually showing them what happens in there, the pants down, up, toilet paper. Lots of my children have only ever used wipes. You might need to keep using wipes. You can get those flushable wipes now, which is good, but some of them might be used to normal wipes. And wiping isn't the priority. Often my children, the motor skills to wipe your bottom and the sensory if you get poo on your hands. I know some of you are going, oh my goodness, I've got a child that loves smearing poo. I know that we have extremes, don't we? But please think about getting on top of that. So, a few things to think about. Well, I hope you're ready to go off and download your ebook if you haven't already. And remember, if you haven't got that email from me, just go and check I'm not ending up in your spam and mark me as a primary email or whitelist me or whatever your email provider calls it. Actually, if you open a couple of my emails, often that will activate your Google to know, yes, I want these emails. So don't miss out on your $50 off, because if you email me in 2 weeks, sorry, we're only doing this for this very special promotion for the next week for the online on demand or the live virtual. Now, if you're like, Sue, but I prefer to read. I'm a reader, not a watcher. Have a look at my early years book. It is just a fantastic book. I wrote it with Gay Von Es, and Gay won an Order of Australia medal for her work with families in the early years. And we put everything in that book that Gay had done in the early years and myself. But what I love about that book It's spiral bound, and people often go to me, "Oh, spiral bound, how come not?" Because it's meant to be a working document. You're meant to photocopy it. You're meant to open it and use it. We don't want proper bound, which actually is cheaper to do it, the normal binding, but I want it to be like a working document. As a teacher, it's so important that you can photocopy, highlight, share ideas with people. With the early years book, I recommend you just choose 2 goals at a time. So let's pretend we're working on the child waiting and finishing, where everybody's going to work on that. The OT, the speech, the psychologists, the grandparents who have the child once a week. Everyone's just going to be using the words wait and finish. The reason for this, in the early years, or all ages really, children often don't generalize or transfer information between settings. It's important if we're teaching finish, they learned it at home, at preschool, at grandparents, at the OT, speech, that we just reinforce the use of the term finish. And then we can, the same with wait. And then once the child's consolidated that across all settings, then we can add 2 more. So I hope that makes sense. I know this has been a lot of information. Download the ebook. Hope to see you soon, either on Zoom or at my online on-demand courses. Happy learning.